It's so unexpected.
It's one of those you had to be there moments.
You had to be there.
It subsequently genuinely did change everything about my life.
You had to be there.
Yes, the latest episode of You Had to Be There on OTB AM. We have Vinny Perth, the former Dundalk manager, in studio with us. Morning, Vinny.
Morning. How are we doing?
You have an interesting selection here. I don't know why in my head I was thinking we're gonna have five soccer picks here. You just before the while the ads were playing there, you mentioned a couple of you were close to a couple of moments, very famous Irish soccer moments, but not there, so you couldn't pick them.
Yeah, it's difficult because when I got asked to do this, it was like, oh, that's straightforward. But then the more you realise you weren't actually at a lot of the big moments.
Yeah.
And, young enough to remember even, say, Dave O'Leary's penalty, etc. But most of us remember George Hamilton as opposed to being there in the stadium. So, yeah, it's an interesting one. And there's a couple, like, I've seen Ireland beat the All Blacks as well quite a couple of times.
Right.
And still didn't make it into my list. So it's interesting. A couple of strange moments that pop up into those big moments.
Well, it is rugby where we'll start. So your first pick is we'll go in I guess order of years. Michael Laine against Ireland at the World Cup 1991, Australia 19, Ireland 18, 20th of October 1991. Today exactly. So we're on to the anniversary, which I've just realised.
That was Lansdowne Road, wasn't it?
Yeah,
Lansdowne Road. So this is a moment where Michael Laine, he's forever linked with that Gordon Hamilton try a few minutes earlier, but a gutting moment for Irish rugby, but what a moment.
Yeah, it was an amazing moment. And I suppose for context, I go to a lot of games, still do. And my wife does check in on me sometimes to say, I go to a huge amount of events on my own. I'm really, since a kid. So before I go into Michael Laine, I say, for example, I remember watching in Dalymount Park, France, and I only was checking the dates on it recently. I was 10, 11, travelled over to Dalymount Park from Tallaght on my own.
Just hop on the bus?
You just hopped in the bus. Michel Platini was the manager. Remember also in Dalymount, Ireland played, I think it was Morocco or something like that, and going again on my own and standing on the terrace. So they're obviously different times, you know, in terms of travelling across the city now, but I went to this Ireland-Australia game on my own as well,
right.
As a schoolboy. And some of my family are involved with St Mary's Rugby Club, obviously, and I ended up, don't know how I picked up a ticket, it was that long ago, but ended up at a really huge moment in Irish sport at the time. And Irish rugby has had so much success of late, but back then beating Australia was unheard of. And for context, for some of my picks is what I'm sort of, what's the word, middle-aged now, so not everything
that
was
already today, yeah.
Yeah, I sort of half heard it, but not everything was on your phone, not everything was on TV. So seeing someone like Michael Laine, it was only a snapshot, it was only a couple of times a year. You couldn't just turn on YouTube and watch moments of different bits and pieces. But this Australian team, and I suppose what I got out of that game was, obviously there was the amazing moments in terms of Ireland's tries and people jumping onto the pitch, but it was like you're watching, for me, and maybe that was the sort of the coach or the way my brain worked. You were looking at a tactician, like he was a number 10. You were looking at this. I was just in awe of him. And what happens with the great teams is there's a myth about them. And there was a real sense for me, even someone like, I was barely a teenager at that stage, 10, 11, I'm watching it going, there's an air of inevitability about Australia scoring, and they ultimately did. And it turned out it was him that caught the big moment. And it was a choice. I sort of go to these games and you watch people, but I remember watching Laine over Campese as well, was sort of the big name at the time, but Michael Laine scored all the points on that day, and he was just sensational. And he got a little bit of luck with the try, but at the same time, the greats are always there when it's there to steal that moment.
My nephew went to Old Trafford last night, his first game. He's like 10, I think. And, you know, I'm wondering, is it nostalgia or were things better when we didn't have access? It was like, as you say, because like back in those days, even the Premier League, there wasn't that much football on the box. No, it was kind of better for that in a way.
Yeah, well, there's no doubt quality has improved, but also, and I'm guilty of it myself, we all also overanalyze what happens in a game. So if that game was to be analysed now, you'd have radio shows, you'd have newspapers, you'd have, and I think we're sort of missing a little bit of substance in terms of sport at the moment. So, like on your point, I remember Liverpool 3-0 down as a kid, and against Manchester United.
Oh,
If you
what a
remember,
night that was.
Razor, I was there that day.
You were at the game?
Yeah, and Razor Ruddock
Didn't make the list.
Amazing header. No, but because Liverpool weren't that good.
Yeah.
You know?
Oh, they were terrible.
They were terrible.
If you look back, they were terrible.
They were
like.
terrible on the day, and they weren't
Nigel Clough with
good,
a pair.
Yeah. So, but they're magical moments, and it's I suppose, like, you think of kids going to stadiums. It's funny. I go to a lot of stadiums in the UK, and I just not. It doesn't have the same sense of what's the enjoyment, or I think there's something missing at the moment. And you go to the continent, and I think probably one of the best sort of sporting moments I ever had in my life was sitting in Warsaw in a Champions League playoff game with Dundalk. And I remember turning to Steve Williams at one stage going, like, in the middle of the game, as a coach, you're lost, and you're watching, you're in charge of set pieces, of who's marking who, and going, Willow, this place is amazing. I used another word. If I lived anywhere within an hour of here, or 2 hours, I'd drive here every week.
One of the best atmospheres I've ever
experienced. And it was just amazing. So I don't think you get that in the UK.
No, absolutely not.
There's times where big games, like obviously you look at City and Liverpool the other day, there was a real tension around it. But a lot of the games now are just, it's over, sort of sanitised, and it's just too quiet.
Totally. These moments are nearly probably heightened in your head, like when Australia go on a week later to beat the All Blacks and then to beat England in the final. Like it probably heightens it, that the fact that this is the team that go on to win, I suppose. That
and maybe when we go through my list, there's probably a common thread in it. When you look at what Lyon had done in terms of winning the World Cup, and he said it himself, that try was his best moment in his sporting career. So it happened in Lansdowne. I happened to be there, and it was against Ireland. Obviously, 19-18, in terms of the score. If you'd have been in Lansdowne talking about, it was an amazing atmosphere. Yeah. But as a young kid, I was already watching this guy going, he's basically tactically controlling the game. And I only had even now, I only have a sort of small understanding of rugby in the sense of where it comes from. But it was like the quietest place you've ever. Once he scored that try, it was just the whole atmosphere was sucked out of the ground, and it was an amazing moment for them because they went on to win a World Cup, and I think they beat the All Blacks about a week later, and knocked out England as well. So they'd done it sort of the hard way, away to Ireland as well. So it was just. You sort of, I don't know whether you know it or not, and it's easy to say it after, but you sort of felt you were watching a piece of history, and one of the greats was that they're doing something special in front of your eyes, and that's when, you know, if you ever see the sort of tries back or the moments back, if the hair stand up in the back of your neck, you know you're you've experienced something
this
special.
Is kind of soppy nostalgia as well, but Vinny's on about the atmosphere in Lansdowne in those days in the rugby. Like, watch back some of the documentaries, no comparison to now. Like, and Ireland was downtrodden as a rugby nation. Like, there would have been a lot of games where Ireland played well and kind of faded, like, late on, like that game in particular. But in the 80s, when like Ireland won a couple of Triple Crowns, really, really poor country in terms of and the atmosphere. Now you go to games and it's primarily fairly wealthy people in the audience having beers. Ireland are very good, and it's just not the same. It actually isn't. And it's, I wasn't at rugby games those days, but I know I'm right on that because you listen back, it's amazing how noisy the place was.
But if you watch Ireland's try, maybe 22, like, the crowd celebrate the try with the players, and in that corner flag, and now that would be a fine. That would be, you know, it's
and it was unbridled.
Happened, and I understand why it doesn't happen now in terms of for security reasons and different things. But in this day, that wouldn't happen now. So seeing the crowd actually celebrate the try with the players on the day.
Your second pick, Vinny, is 1995. Again, Irish dreams crushed, this time by a 19-year-old Patrick Kluivert. So this was a Euro 96 playoff.
Big Jack.
Kluivert gets Big Jack. Kluivert gets a couple of goals. So it's 13th of December 1995. The Netherlands 2, Ireland 1. This was Anfield?
Anfield, yeah. So I stood on the cup. Actually stood on the cup. Richard Dunn had recently signed for Everton at the time. So the two of us went to the game.
Right.
And it's interesting. the career he went to go on to have. But the two of us stood on the cop that day, and obviously the Jack moments were special. If you ever see the footage at the end of the game, You'll Never Walk Alone, we want Jack back. I mean, the two of us stood there and sang it as loud as anybody, and he came back out with his flag, and but at the same time you knew it was the end of an era, that the team was tired. It was time to sort of regenerate that team, and you already got that sense. But Kluivert, again, when you look back on players now, you look at Haaland and what he has become. We've known that, and we've seen that footage for the last 4 or 5 years. With Kluivert and what he was doing at Ajax was under the radar in many ways. Now, he had just scored the winner in the Champions League final at 18 years of age, don't get me wrong. But it was sort of, the TV coverage has sort of helped my memories, if that makes sense, because it was all of a sudden I was watching a star. Now, he was part of an amazing Overmars at that time, was world class as well. Seedorf had just come through that Ajax team, Van der Sar in goal, so it was sort of a golden generation of Ajax players. But he, on the day, like Paul McGrath playing centre half, he on the day, he could have had 5 or 6, and he scored 2 amazing goals. And albeit he crushed Ireland's dreams, and we had a couple of chances. I remember Terry Phelan blazing over the bar, and maybe a half volley from the edge of the box by McGrath. But on the day, the Dutch just looked world class, and him in particular. And to see somebody so young, like 18 years of age.
It's funny to think back to it. We were in 2 World Cups in a row at that stage.
Yeah.
And it was almost like, I remember thinking, I would have been, 14 or that. I was thinking there was almost this surprise that, yeah, we were fairly beaten by Holland in a one-off. It's like, geez, are we at that level now where we just have to accept and look at like, we had riches then that we didn't understand.
Yeah, and even and sort of, it was still Cascarino playing up front. Like, so and I think world football was beginning to change, and there's a few moments where, for me, it changed. I mean, you look at France '98. I think that's when football changed to real athleticism. You look at, we'll go on to Spain later on in 2012. That's when the sort of possession game and the ability to keep the ball changed. But it was like this Dutch team, young, youthful players. With the same time, they, the likes of Seedorf wasn't shy about making a tackle in any way, shape or form. But it was a different way of doing it, and we looked tired and all that day. And ultimately, Jack's tactics had run out of its sort of lifespan on that day. And Kluivert punished us so much. Like his dink for the second goal late in the game was just like, it was right in front of us on the cop. But it was amazing to see, and I just went. I know his career. Sort of, I don't know. He had an amazing career in many ways, but he got a knee injury heading into that World Cup, and I know he did score against England in the 4-1 defeat at that championship, but he wasn't the same player for a couple of years. Went on to have a brilliant career, I think, at Barcelona. But it was like, it was almost like, for me, as much as I'd seen him on and off the TV, as I said, to see somebody like that live, you go, wow, this guy is the real deal. And it was sensational on the day.
Is 16-year-old Richard Dunn, centre half, in the crowd standing beside you going, I would have stopped Kluivert there?
Yeah, it's funny. I don't remember him saying that too much, but it's funny. It's funny when you think of like singing "We Want Jack Back" and different things like that. When you think of it, there was no cameras around at the time. There was no camera phones, no text messages. He had just signed for Everton, and you think the career he went to go on to have. Yeah. And he marked Kluivert not that long after that, to be honest. A couple of years later, he ended up marking Kluivert. So I don't remember having in-depth conversations with him at the time in terms of what would you do against this guy, because yourself, it seems so far away. But it was a it was a special moment. But I think the Kluivert part of it for me was amazing. But also the whole occasion, that was one of the best occasions I think I've ever been at Anfield. And then the sort of, it was a weird thing where the Dutch fans started applauding, and you knew they were applauding the Irish fans. So then the Irish fans started applauding the Dutch fans, and it was just this
good
weird
vibes all around. Just
this great vibes. And then we came out of the stadium. Then all of a sudden got hostile, because typical typical the wrong word, but the British police were there, and you could tell they at that time they policed football games completely different. And
something was in the air.
Yeah, and there was something in the air. And I remember we were only young lads. We jumped in a taxi and went back to Richard's Digs at the time and just got out of the city as quick as we could. But there was still that sort of hooliganism element around British football at the time, because it was obviously played in a neutral venue. So
I'm sure poor Alan Kelly in goals remembers Patrick Cliver quite well from that night as well.
Yeah.
Your third pick is a better memory. It's also against the Dutch, but Roy Keane's intrepid performance in 2001. This one went the right way. So this is the 2002 World Cup qualifier course, September 1st, 2001. We all remember what happened with the goal with Jason McAteer, but Roy Keane's performance that day was something else.
Yeah, I think if you remember in the first minute, he just nailed Mark Overmars, and he didn't get booked, in the whole game.
Right, he didn't get booked at all.
No,
Remember Jaap Stam's tackle and him going into the goal then?
Just in the build up for the goal, and I remember Mark van Bommel and him went up against each other, and he just had him on a piece of string. It was like a toy.
Couldn't happen to a nicer fella.
Yeah. But I tell you, like, it's funny. We now the Roy that we know now. It's because I grew up sort of a Liverpool fan, but I was always quite neutral in terms of, even to this day, who I like, who I didn't like. I never had a real love for Roy Keane.
Yeah.
I don't know what it was, but that day, I remember it was the old Lansdowne as well. So you were up in that old sort of main stand, and the atmosphere was obviously, we were expecting to beat teams like Holland at the time, when you think of where we stand now or over the last sort of 10, 12 years. But I think Roy, he had this, people have different views of Roy Keane in terms of how he played, but he had this calmness about him. I know the game ended frantic, as in the Dutch had 6-7 forwards on that stuff, but if you actually go back to the game, he was so controlled and measured and everything. He was calmness was personified. His passing range, went to slow the game down, and also what he never really gets the credit for when people talk about Roy Keane the player, his ability to make breaks into the box and in behind people, and that stretches midfields, and particularly the way the game was played then, nearly 4-4-2s. I remember one time he made a run in behind. It was in behind Stam, and McIntyre overhit the ball, goes to the end line, and like the crowd went quiet, and you could hear Roy nailing McIntyre, and like McIntyre the usual.
They obviously kissed it up years later.
Yeah, no, they obviously made up as it developed. But his performance that day, and
it's the tragedy of what we knew was going to happen in Saipan.
And that's the killer part. Like, he obviously had such high standards, but I don't think if he didn't have them standards, Ireland would have won that game. Like they had a corner at one stage, and it's cleared the edge of the box, and it's a brilliant moment where, and it sort of summed up Roy in many ways, because people will sum him up by the tackle on Overmars, but he broke about 60 yards. Jaap Stam is sort of running after him. He's the only one nearly in the Dutch half. He just kills the ball with his studs and just rolls it back to a Gary Kelly or someone behind him, and just like really, really calm. And I remember at one stage there was a ball back. Richard Dunn played that game because he came into the team on that game. It was him and Steve Staunton as centre half. And all of a sudden the Irish players were passing through lines, because Roy was demanding of them to do it, as in his positions, or he wasn't, because of the level he played at. I remember one stage he got the ball, the Dutch had he won a ball in the midfield, gets it out of his feet, turns. I actually remember, because obviously I was mates with a guy playing here. This was weird. And he just fires it back to Richard Dunn, who first time passed it out to Gary Kelly. And you're like, and it was so almost even at that time un-Ireland, like, because we were starting to transition.
Have we had anyone like that since as well, Vinny? This is the thing, we've never had that midfield general. You look at us even against Armenia, where we lose our way very quickly, we change the midfield. We just haven't had anything like that, where it's like he demands it. Like I look after this ball for you.
Yeah, we've had flashes of brilliant moments in terms of people have gone into that position and done really, really well at different stages. But no, of course, we've never had that world-class midfielder. Like, in fairness, in that game you had when you think back to the previous Dutch game, maybe in the playoff, Duffer was brilliant on the day as well. To be fair to him, Kevin Camban played, Gary Kelly played, Steve Fillon came on, I think. But the Duff, Dunn, Robbie Keane, obviously, but that is such a pivotal position in football that if you don't have that, you're going to struggle. And he set the tone for everything that was good about it. So no, we've had, like, if you go to the Euros in 2012, I think probably our best player was Keith Andrews at the time in midfield. We've had different moments where Josh Cullen is trying to emerge in that position, but he's very different than what Roy Keane is. So it is a big problem for us. We've sort of stopped developing those sort of. I think we stopped developing number 10s in Irish football, and that sort of really great number 6.
Just looking at the Dutch lineup from that day as well. Van der Sar was in goals. Then the back four: Mario Melchiot, Kevin Hofland, Arthur Newman, Jaap Stam. You Philip Cocu, the captain for the Dutch, Overmars, Van Bommel, Zenden, and then Kluivert and Van Nistelrooy up top. And then off the bench, Hasselbank, Van Hooijdonk, Van Bronckhorst. Didn't realise as well, like, Steve Finnan comes off the bench on 60 minutes.
Yeah.
On 67th minute, he crosses for.
We were down to 10 so
Hope.
long as well.
We were down to, so Gary Kelly got sent off as well. And but going back to Roy,
that's just literally 2 minutes before Finnan comes on.
And I want to explain this well enough. Go back to Roy though, right? He picks up the ball on just inside his own half on the far touchline. Van Bommel is close to him. Amazing little bit of skill. He drives straight across midfield. Jaap Stam jumps out the back four, which actually helps the goal. Makes a stupid tackle on Roy Keane. Damien Duff is sort of in central. He's off his wing position. He plays the ball, Damien Duff. Then Stam absolutely nails Roy Keane. And then Duff goes out to Finnan. Whether it's a great cross or not, it's overhit cross.
Doesn't
the
matter.
Dutch are out of shape because of what Roy had done. If you ever watched the goal back, and then McIntyre, obviously it's a brilliant finish, but the goal came from Roy's brilliant bit of skill against Mark Vommel right on the left touchline.
Was that our best team that we've ever had that day, in the sense of, because Keane didn't play in the World Cup, so was that as good as it got for Ireland, or would you go back to the early, sort of the late 80s, around the sort of early Jack era?
I suppose I think you would, in terms of, I think for players we had, in terms of around Aldrich, Houghton at the time, Ronnie Whelan, those people were in and out of the team. Defensively were really strong. I think the team that played against Italy in the '94 World Cup was probably our best team. McGrath and Babb at the back. Houghton, albeit off the right. People say Jack never had tactics, and I think that suits the after dinner speaker type of element. But if you even go back to that goal Ireland scored in the '94 World Cup, John Sheridan dropped short. Andy Townsend was more of a sitter. He was the runner in the game. Yeah. John Sheridan dropped short, gets it off Dennis Irwin. Yes, he goes long, but actually Houghton is in that sort of number 10 position that he came in off the line and then chips one over the keeper. But that team, I think, was probably where we were at our very, very best.
Your fourth and penultimate pick on you had to be there this morning, Vinny, is Euro 2012, another painful memory. Andres Iniesta performance as Spain beat. Isn't it? Yeah, let's talk it all through. Spain 4, Republic of Ireland 0. Murder on the Gdansk floor, I think, was one of the headlines. In one of the
having that one.
Brilliant one. A tough night for Ireland, but what a night for Iniesta.
Yeah, but, and again, it's a bit like Line at the start, right? Iniesta was amazing on the day, and I remember sitting in the stadium saying, because again it's 2012, so you're starting to see a lot more football, and he's part of this great Barcelona team that was really good. The Spanish had sorted a lot of their problems out, in terms of the Real Madrid were so strong, Barcelona players, the clash of these sort of players, and they grew into this tournament, and I think they brought football to a new level. It was he played sort of narrow off the left, but he had this freedom to go and roam everywhere, and he was turning up in different positions. He did direct handing to the goals he scored that night. He went on to be player of the tournament. He was just simply sensational throughout that tournament. And to see him live and to see what he'd done to that Irish team, who, look, that Irish team were tired at the time.
Yes.
It was a step two, and it was difficult. It was a difficult night because around that time in 2012, it's funny. I went to the tournament. I don't know what weight I was, right, when I went. I went for 14 days. I was in around the team hotel. I know everyone was, but I mean properly in around the team hotel, and I think I came back about 1.5 stone overweight at the time, heavier than what I remember getting off the plane Dublin Airport. My wife picked me up going, look at the state. I was in bits.
And your weight isn't great either.
Weight wasn't great either. But it was an amazing time. And for someone, I had just sort of finished with football and I was doing bits and pieces. Because when you're involved in football, a lot of these tournaments, particularly in League of Ireland terms, happen. That's where you're at, not many of them. They happen while sort of we're in season or different things. And this time I had the freedom to go. And it was an amazing experience, that European Championships. Ireland were really, really poor. But I think I seen one of the great midfielders of the great generations. I think I seen one of the most amazing performances that any midfielder has ever put in from an Irish sort of, or against an Irish team or anybody I've seen. And then it played out. That team was just cruise to the European Championships.
At, like that Spanish starting lineup as well. Like Casillas, Arbeloa, Piqué, Ramos, Jordi Alba, Xavi, Busquets, Alonso, Silva, Torres, Iniesta, and then just to refresh people's memories, we were only 1-0 down at half time. Torres 4th minute, and then second half, David Silva gets a goal 4 minutes into the second half. Torres gets his second on 70 minutes, and then Fabregas in the 83rd. So at half time, we're probably thinking, geez, they're all over us, but if we just nick a goal here.
You do, and you do think like that, particularly with, say, Robbie on the pitch or Duffer, we're hang in here. And it was, in many ways, that was the Trapattoni way in terms of staying in a game and hopefully some big moment can happen. And a lot of Ireland's big moments around that time did come, like the goal against Germany, when you are getting bashed a little bit and then one big moment from people. But I think the big moments had gone out of that group, unfortunately. But if you even go back to, and this is where my brain works from a tactical point of view. All of a sudden, Spain, there was a team playing with no wingers here. So you'd like Iniesta playing narrow, and the responsibility was Arbeloa and Jordi Alba to go as almost wing backs, even though they weren't wing backs. So Spain, to play that way, had to keep the ball for fun. So the Xavi, Iniesta,
and they could.
Busquets, and they could, and they did. Now, it's funny, I was only recently checking the stats. It's saying that our Spain had 66% of the ball, right? But it actually on the night felt like they'd 80 to 90% of the ball at the time. So albeit we were 1-0 down, we were completely and utterly outpassed. And in that moment, that was a real snapshot of Iniesta. He got 3 man of the match throughout that tournament. Awards, won the player of the tournament, and as I said, I think, he had amazing players, David Silva, and again, I don't think Torres started the final, so they were changing how people played football for me around that time. It was David Silva, but it was a new way of playing football, and it was just amazing to see in terms of. I'd like to think that. That was 2012, so when we went into Dundalk in 2013, we just copied Spain, but I can't get away with that.
Pretty much did.
Yeah, your final one, Vinny, you got a trip later that year in 2012 then in December over to the States. Kobe Bryant against the Philly 76ers. 16th of December.
This is a left field one now.
Yeah,
I'm sure people didn't see this was coming. So briefly, I was over with the NFL hockey team, the Philly Flyers. So I was over with them for a week. Had something I'd pre-planned. Again, this was just before I went into sort of coaching, and but they were on strike at the time. There was a hockey strike. It went on for nearly 6 months. So, but we got to see them train, got to be around them. But just happened to be an NFL or the NBA game was on in Philly while I was there. Went online and I got like courtside tickets for something ridiculous, like $100 on the day.
Jeez.
Like it was like I was like, there's a mistake here. And again, you didn't have on my phone. I don't think we had video at the time, but you certainly had. I have a picture on my phone of Kobe scoring a 3-pointer, and I'm literally. And when he got taken off or when he got set down, he was like 2 yards in front of me. It was amazing.
Jesus.
And I wasn't a big NBA fan at the time, or probably still amn't, but he calls it to. It's amazing. So I'm talking about Iniesta and the moment he had, or Michael Laine saying it was his best match. So Kobe talks about the 2012-13 season being his best of his career.
Right.
Now they didn't ultimately win the top prize at the time, but he scored 34 points on the day, and he
6 assists and 4 rebounds as well.
He was just like the stadium was electric, and there was spare seats around and different things. But they were playing away from home. But every time he got the ball, it's what the greats do. You just get this sense of like anticipation, something magical is going to happen.
This was in Philly, this game.
This was in Philly,
so a lot of the home fans were pretty disgruntled, no doubt on that.
Yeah, but it wasn't. It was like it's almost like they were watching one of the greats doing something great. So it was. I think statistically, it was his best season. But to score 34 points of 111 doesn't seem that much, but it was huge at the time. No, it's not something that people generally do, and what you can't explain when you're watching someone that is that great what he has, what's the special. And we often use this phrase going back to even Dundalk about creating a myth. There was this, you're almost looking at someone mystical in front of you. Like you're talking about 2 yards sitting in front of you, 5 yards from the throw line, you're watching them getting 3 points. But you also then, you do realise, so you watch a lot of NBA on TV, and the athleticism that's needed, and he was a cut above everybody at the time.
Can I ask you very briefly? I'm probably taking this over here, but do you look back now at that 2016 run, and you look at Rovers haven't scored a goal yet in 4 games, and kind of look a bit out of their depth at times in Europe? Do you look back and think, Dane Massey hit the crossbar in Tala against Zenit, and we were nearly 7 points from 3 games on top in the group. Did this actually happen? And you're like, you expect Dundalk then struggled afterwards the next time, but you're like, Jesus, this happened.
Well, like, not to go up on a tangent, Johnny. It's 10 years. When next season starts, it's 10 years since since Stephen took over Dundalk.
Yeah.
And sometimes, again, you're talking about therapy sessions. Sometimes I have to remind people, I was with him that day as well when he took over. It was generally the 2 of us. Right,
so you're starting off, and he's almost kind of trying to reinvent himself after.
So I was there for that moment. So, but I think in the last 10 years, that Dundalk team is there. Everyone argue about the great Shelbourne team, about great Rovers team that won 4, but that is one of the greatest teams and the greatest achievement of a League of Ireland team in terms of where they took the game to. You talk about moving the game on other levels. I think they did that. Fitness levels in the league, professionalism in the league went up another level, because to compete with Dundalk, you had to.
Didn't lose one game in the group by more than a goal.
And so, but to sum up the way, and I don't know whether every coach thinks like that, but to sum up my brain, I've got probably 3 memories in the last 10 years of different things. And the 3 of them are Dane Massey hitting the post, because I think we'd have got out of group if that goes in. I think Zenit would have, I don't mean give up, but 2-0 down. They were going to get out of the group anyway. I think we would have got out of the group if that ball goes in. The penalty shootout in 2019 that Dundalk lost. We probably deserved to lose the game. We lost Patrick McElhenney and Chris Shields in the build-up. But I remember that, and I remember last year against Vitesse Arnhem. I think if we score in our sort of last 10-minute spell, we knocked them out, and we progress. So that's a long-winded way of saying to you, you only remember the sort of, not the failures, but they're like, I had amazing moments with that team, and made doubles, European runs, experience stuff. But they're the stuff you remember. And what I'd say on that is a long-winded answer in your Shamrock. Like, you have to make these moments special, because yes, the Conference League has given people a chance to play European football regularly, but I just think there's big moments passing some big players by, and I hope they don't regret that.
Totally agree. And he could have said, like, I was there for Robbie Benson's goal in Warsaw. I was actually on the bench. Or I was there for
Robbie Benson.
Patrick McElhenney's goal in Arnhem. You're like,
You know what? I debated Daryl Horgan's performance away to Zenit St. Petersburg, but we didn't win the game.
Yeah.
And again, Patrick McElhinney hit the crossbar in the 91st minute. I still can see that moment happen in front of me. I actually can't remember
the orange ball,
the other big moments that happened in that day, but I can remember that brilliant move, Daryl Horgan picking it up, driving past people, and pinging the ball out to McElhinney, counter-attack, and we hit the crossbar to go 2-0 in the game. So that, again, maybe I'm different, but it's funny that you remember that moment and not the other big moments. And that's where you hope that the Shamrock Rovers group don't live to regret not seizing the moment of what it is.
Yeah, great moments there, but sadly none of them made the final five. So just to recap, Michael Lina, Ireland World Cup defeat in 1991. Then we went to Patrick Kluivert in 1995, Roy Keane's performance in 2001, Iniesta wrecking us in Gdansk in 2012, and then Kobe Bryant in Philadelphia, December 2012. Vinny, great picks, unbelievable. Thanks a million for coming in this morning.
Thank you.
That is the latest episode of You Had to Be There.
It's so unexpected.
It's one of those you had to be there moments.
You had to be there.
It subsequently genuinely did change everything about my life.
You had to be there.